I believe that another way the enemy is stealing, killing, and destroying from John 10:10, this generation is through sexual darkness that defines the rest of their life, robs them of the ability to believe they have value, they have worth, that they can be loved by God, first of all, but also by a spouse, which is, Paul says, a picture of the gospel. It's a mystery. Now, it for sure is a shadow. It's not the form, but it is a picture of the gospel, that you have this tension that you live in, this fear, this brokenness. What if you could get ahead of that? You can't stop all of it, but what if you could get ahead of it? What if we could reframe the whole idea of sex in an entire generation? That would be as miraculous as if every person who was blind was healed tomorrow and given sight.
Welcome to TheSexTalk.com, where parents can go to get clear and confident to have the sex talk with their kids.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Sex Talk podcast. I have an exciting guest for you today. One of the pastors of the Church of 1122, Trey Brunson, is a dear friend of mine. He and I serve on a board together and collaborate in ministry regularly. And Trey and his wife have gone through the entire Sex Talk and have started already implementing it with their children. Trey, I'm glad you're here, bro.
Man, it's an honor to be here. I love you, man. So whatever you need,
Me too. Yeah, man. No, I was, before we started filming, I was saying, I think for parents listening, the most valuable thing is to just hear the real stories, because there's such a stigma around this, and parents just have I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. I don't know when to start. And obviously, as a shepherd, as a pastor, but as a father, you just started. You called me up the other day and you were like, Nick, I got a story to tell you. And I was like, let's go. And so what has your experience been with the Sex Talk, man?
Yeah, well, so it's so funny. I remember you saying, hey, I want you to go through this thing. I want you to give me your thoughts on it. And I said, yeah, sure. And then about 9 months later, I finally got around to doing the thing I said I would do. And I did it because it was hunting season. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting in a deer stand, and I had I had one AirPod in my ear, and I thought, well, I'm sitting here. I had this beautiful view in front of me. I'm just waiting for a deer to pop out. And so I just started listening to the content. And after 2 or 3 days on this hunt, I had made it, I don't know, 60%, 70% through the content. And I had this massive note in my phone of all the things I was going to say. And then the funny thing is, life just happens, and it's another 6 months goes by. We have 5 kids, Rachel and I. Our oldest is 11, all the way down to 3. And I had an opportunity. I was going to go preach for a friend in Georgia, and I was going to take a friend with me, and he backed out last minute. And so I'm always looking for opportunities for one-on-one time with my kids. Mm-hmm. And I just thought, let me take my older 2 boys with me, and maybe we'll have the talk while we're driving up. Let's start things to get going. My 11-year-old is going into the 5th grade. He just started in the 5th grade. And so we get in the car and we're driving up to Georgia from Florida. And I just said, hey guys, I had a question for you. Do you know what sex means? And they're both in the seat behind me. And Wyatt, my oldest, goes, you mean boys and girls? And I said, yeah, and I've got this whole note of start with God's design. I'm like, yeah, God made boys, God made girls. Why do you think that is? And they're giving me these great answers about how boys are tough and they're made to fight and girls are made to take care of things. And, I'm leaning into even the question. I'm trying to seed some things early on, well, can you change? No.
Yeah.
No, Dad, you can't go from being a boy to be, no, God made you that way. You're right, guys. And so it was amazing how the Sex Talk gave me get this foundation in, and then what I would never have thought of if it hadn't been for you guys. As we shift, I said, there's another meaning for the word sex. No, Dad, what does it mean? And I said, well, when a man loves a woman, to go very Barry Manilow on my kids, I began to explain, and Judah said, you mean when a dad lays down on a couch with a mom? And I said, kind of. And I used very specific language, like you guys said. This is what a penis does. This is what a vagina does. This is how this works. And there was a lot of silence in the back of the car.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's a lot to take in. I said, but we were in a sermon series. We just finished a sermon series at our church on spiritual warfare. And one of the things my pastor said over and over and over again is anything that God creates, Satan corrupts. Mm-hmm. And even in our kids' ministry, they're hearing this language. So I asked that question, knowing you guys had set me up. Don't just talk about sex, but talk about the ways that they will engage and experience and that it will become a potential trap for them. I said, if you guys were Satan, how would you corrupt what God had created in sex? And I love it. Judah, my 9-year-old, was right on it. And he went, well, Dad, I bet he'd tell us we should have a bunch of sex with a bunch of people. Absolutely. That's 100% right. And I said, can you imagine if mommy left daddy and went off with other people and she was never around? They're like, no, like they got very angry in that moment.
Yeah.
Right. Or if daddy left mommy and I had other mommies, other places, like that, how much that would hurt you guys. God made us, not just like he made sex. He also made a man to love a woman for all of his life. And then I went into like another way would be pornography. Have you guys ever heard of that word before? They're like, no. And I'm like, this is pictures and videos and even like jokes about sex that are not meant to like be kind to other people. And so I began to like seed that knowing. And what I wanted to do was get so far ahead of if someone shows you something, if you see something, you just come and you talk to mom and dad about it and let us help you figure out where Satan might be doing something or where it's a great conversation for us to have. And then the best part, man, we get into Georgia right around that time. It had been raining the whole time, so they couldn't listen to anything or watch anything. They were like, we're just glued into this conversation. We go to this Mexican restaurant. Yeah, this was what made it even better. I'm like, you know what, guys? I'm going to get you a virgin margarita. And so they had these little like strawberry margaritas. And then we get to the hotel that night and the Terminator was on TBS. So I knew it wouldn't have any of the crazy scenes in it. And the next day when we're driving home, they're like, Dad, this has been the best trip ever.
Said no son ever around having the sex talk with his father.
Yeah. And you guys, it was like T-ball. You set me up for like start with God, which as a pastor, you would think I would be there. But I think every parent, you just wonder like, do I find myself into this conversation or do I lead this conversation? And you guys set me up like start with God, start with the scriptures, move into design, move into like talking in very real terms about these things so that it's not like baby terms or you're not joking about it, but you're being serious about it. Move into like, this is how you're going to encounter these things immediately. And we're always here to help you. All of that came out. We had an incredible weekend and we've had so many conversations since then where like they'll come up.
I hadn't heard that part. Okay.
Yeah. Like a couple weekends ago, I forget what was on TV, but Judah came over and he said, Dad, I think something was on the TV that shouldn't have been. Oh, wow. Okay. What was it? And he had me rewind this thing they were watching. And I was like, for sure, that should not have been on television. So we removed YouTube Kids, man. YouTube Kids, you would think. Safe
it's
for kids.
Bad, dude. No,
not at all.
No.
You are for sure, Nick, my cultural translator in all these things. I deleted Twitter after our conversation, man. I had no clue. I thought this is like where I get news. No more, man. Not on my social media platform anymore. No longer YouTube Kids subscriber. So
yeah, dude, I'm as your friend, I'm immensely proud. I can say that because it's kind of funny, the amount of my like closest God-fearing family friends that I know. I'm like, yo, you got to go through this, and they haven't yet. And I'm like, you have to go through this. Yes. And but for that reason of I desperately, I love you so well that I love your children, that I care about them.
Yeah.
And so literally your narrative right there, that is the dream. If I could wave a magic wand and have every Christian parent have that happen. Dude, we were talking about revival before the beginning of this recording. It's like that would literally begin happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm just so excited for your boys and obviously for your 3 littles coming up under them. And Yeah. So, I mean, stay in that pocket, but then now pivot to your pastoral and shepherding lens, right? Because we're talking revival, we're talking YouTube kids not being safe, and like our kids plugged in. So, like, as a pastor who has a flock, who has children under his care, and we see these statistics of the youth leaving the church, and we could surmise potentially this being one of the many reasons. But how do you see the Sex Talk, and what it is this family discipleship curriculum helping you as a pastor, helping the kingdom of God?
Yeah, well, two probably extreme takes on that. One, in the talk with Wyatt and Judah about pornography, I shared with them, man, it's crazy when you think back on your own life, things that happened to you. When I was 8 or 9, my parents, it's so funny, they must have gotten like a raise or something somehow, because there was like expendable cash all of a sudden. We went from nachos were Ritz crackers with cheese on them. I didn't know what a real nacho was until I was an adult. But my parents all of a sudden had money for piano lessons. This is wild, Nick. Like, there's so much, I'm not really sure what to do with this, but I was telling them when I was 8 or 9, my parents paid for my sister and I to get piano lessons. We would go to this lady's house, and my sister would be in one room doing the piano with this lady for an hour, and I would sit in their den, and then we would swap. My sister would go sit in the den, and I would do my piano lessons for an hour. And we did this for over a year. Her coffee table was all pornography. It was Playboys, Hustlers. I'm 9. I don't know any of these things. My dad, one time when I was like 13, we were in the car and he's asked me, do you know where babies come from? And I was like, yes, please, let's not have this conversation now. He totally missed that window. And my dad's such a godly man. It just wasn't a thing that like we talked about. Mm-hmm. And so as a 9-year-old who has no frame of reference for this, for an hour every week, I would just flip through, and I didn't have a clue what it was, but I'm just being inundated with this. Other direction. I'm at a conference a few weeks ago, a men's conference, and I found myself one morning out. It was in Mountain Time Zone. I found myself out early because 2 hours time difference for me, sitting around this campfire eating oatmeal because they had the little instant oatmeal things and drinking coffee. And the guy who was the host, the pastor of this church, he comes out and he sits down with me and he just asked me a couple of questions, and we stumbled into him telling me how he had been sexually abused from 8 to 12 years old by a cousin. And dude, he's bawling, and everything in his life changed from that moment on. And he's just telling me all these things. This is normal for me to either meet with couples where pornography is literally the like wedge between them. A year ago, I'm with a couple and they're talking to me about how they have all these financial difficulties and would you pray for our marriage? 2 weeks later, I'm back in there. And what we find out is she caught him spending money on OnlyFans, like paying ladies to send him pictures and content of them. And I was like, wait, were we talking about financial struggles? Well, there's where the financial struggles come from. Like, you are literally sacrificing your marriage, your family, 2 young kids, sacrificing your family, just like Old Testament. Kids being offered to Molech on the altar of pornography. The other thing is the number of couples that I do a ton of weddings, a ton of premarital counseling, a ton of marriage counseling. The number of couples that I am walking with in some counseling capacity where abuse is a part of one of their stories. Mm-hmm. And it's my wife was abused as a kid, so we've navigated a lot of this. And I think this is part of why God sends some of those couples to me, is I'm able to like pick up on some things earlier on. It creates so much friction and tension and confusion and hurt that like this is normal in our culture for men and women to have some type of pornography addiction, and for almost 50% of people to have some form of abuse in their past that is defining not only their present, but their future currently, because they're not working through these things. If you're not having these conversations with your kids, just imagine if every parent walked through this conversation with their kid, how much further you could potentially get ahead of abuse. If somebody says or does, touches, asks something, they would already know that's not right. Justin Holcomb has a book on like children, where you should and shouldn't allow someone to touch you. We had our kids walk through this book, like little kids in bathing suits. No one should touch you anywhere that's underneath the bathing suit. If anybody says, don't tell your mom and dad these things, you have to tell your mom and dad these things. Same idea. Like if we're setting our kids up, because while we are, man, I believe in a moment of what feels like potential revival. Every time in the scriptures you see God move in a powerful way, the enemy almost always moves against the next generation. So this is like Moses is going to come and he's going to deliver the people of Israel, right? He is going to be the deliverer that God uses. Pharaoh begins to kill the entire generation of children. Jesus is, you have at that point in time, they come after, we're going to kill all of the children so that we don't have the Messiah come out. It's just this natural reaction the enemy has to the movement of the Spirit of God is to kill a generation. And for sure, abortion is a piece of that in our culture. But I believe that another way the enemy is stealing, killing, and destroying from John 10:10, this generation is through sexual darkness that defines the rest of their life, robs them of the ability to believe they have value, they have worth, that they can be loved by God, first of all, but also by a spouse, which is, Paul says, a picture of the gospel. It's a mystery. Now, it for sure is a shadow. It's not the form, but it is a picture of the gospel, that you have this tension that you live in, this fear, this brokenness. What if you could get ahead of that? You can't stop all of it, but what if you could get ahead of it? What if we could reframe the whole idea of sex in an entire generation? That would be as miraculous as if every person who was blind was healed tomorrow and given sight.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Dude, that vision. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord, may it be so. Will you move? Will you open up your floodgates? If you're a parent listening, lean in. This is what we want. And I love that picture as well, which equally ties into the sermon series you're in right now. You just told me, but like our culture, we're not doing a good job. I would actually say we're doing a horrible job of giving our children armor, the armor of God. We're not putting them in it at all. We're saying, hey, you're okay. You can be on YouTube Kids, or hey, you're okay. You can go here. You're not armored in any way. And man, the damage and the destruction. I heard it said once that in the enemy's playbook, the second he can get some significant harm or negative moment to happen to a young child around sex and sexuality, it diverges them on a path. Like it's the one thing that he can change their trajectory forever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just terrifying to me. And I want parents to, and you're right, you're not able to create a world where your children will not experience suffering. That's not the conversation we're having. You are equipping your children for when it happens.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a huge difference between like, I love M. Night Shyamalan and The Village. I think about it a lot, how when you, and this is definitely not a spoiler because that movie has been out for half of my life.
Yeah.
When you get to the end of that movie and you recognize these were people who pulled away from the world to try and create their own like hidden, we can control, we can keep things safe. And it led to like chaos, right? We're not saying go all Amish or desert monk and pull away from the world. How do you equip your children to be in the world and not of the world? That's biblical. It's Jesus. Like, this is true. You're here. And then for sure, there is a thing, man, where like, I don't know all of it, but Paul says all other sins are outside the body. But sexual sin is against your body. There is something unique about sexual sin, temptation. I was the Jacksonville director for Christian Surfers. Christian Surfers is an international organization. I was the Jacksonville director for 3 years. I'm not even really sure how that happened. Almost every girl that came through had been abused.
Yeah.
It got to where like I had to do so much reading and studying on how can I help? I was not prepared for this, man. Southern Baptist Convention did not prepare me for this. Seminary did not prepare me for this. You know, like if you just go through seminary to be a pastor, you might have a class, unless that's the thing you focus on. You may have a class that's quasi counseling oriented. And you're like, what do you do with all of these people? For sure, Nick, like whenever there is sexual sin, it is a different conversation. It does shape it. It's a wound that has to be addressed, that very few people ever address. What you end up doing is you suppress. I have a very good friend who 2 years ago at a men's encounter remembered that when he was in middle school, he had been abused. And what he said was he just pushed that thing down for so long that he had forgotten it even happened.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book, The Body Keeps the Score. That's one of the things it talks about, how we just push these things down inside because they're shameful. The guy that I sat around the campfire with a few weeks ago, he said when he went through some intensive counseling, one of the things they said was to picture an animal, kind of, you know, like you say, a spirit animal, like have a visual image for what happened to you, what that thing, what it would look like. And he said, I pictured an anaconda, because an anaconda wraps itself around its prey and it chokes the oxygen out of them. You can't breathe. He said, shame had so choked out the ability to have life in me. How many people, Nick, are walking through the front door of your church, my church on Sunday, wrapped up in an anaconda of shame and cannot breathe? How many people are in our own homes? And it's the nature of not just sexual sin, but what the enemy does, how the enemy says, you're broken. Mm-hmm. Nobody would want you. Mm-hmm. What you've done is so bad. God can't love you, which again, like all you have to do is just open the Bible. And that's not true at all. It couldn't be further from the truth of God that he knew everything about you. Pastor Matt Chandler was preaching in our church last night, and he said, how many of your sins had you committed before he died on the cross? None of them. So they've all been paid for. Like none of them. He knew exactly what he was getting when he died for you. But the enemy just gets specifically in the head of people where there's sexual sin. And it is, you have failed. You are worthless. No one wants you. No one loves you, least of all God. What if you could get ahead of those lies in your kids' ears? Even when, like I think this will be a conversation in the years to come, specifically with 5 kids, 3 of them being boys, even when you fail.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Instead of running from him, Adam and Eve, let's go figure out how to fix this on our own. What if you ran to him and allow him to heal and let grace change everything?
Yeah. And I mean, that is another part of the sex talk. I think that's one of the things we're the most passionate about with this curriculum for many parents, just introducing them to the idea that it's more than a talk, you kind of had with your father. But the sex talk, it moves with your children as they age. And so you're absolutely right. When they're 3, when they're 4, when they're 5, it's who can touch where and what are these things called and what, God made man and God made woman. When your boys are 9, 10, 11, you're really starting to get into the details. 13, 14, 15, okay, your testosterone is raging. You will have slip-ups. You will stumble. Can you imagine? I don't know. I've never heard in 8 years, maybe you have, of a story of a son who, if he stumbles and masturbates, goes and tells his dad and says, Dad, I need help. like, oh my gosh, if that was the reality, again, we don't want this for our children. We're not saying it's okay, but you and Rachel are these shepherds for your children. And then when they're dating, what's the sex talk look like? And then when they're engaged, what does the sex talk look like? And then when they're married, what does the sex talk look like? Because here's what it looks like right now. And it sounds like your story is what is the average, I would say the norm, not even the average, where it's you had a talk, and then not much else intersection with sex and sexuality. And then you get married. And if you're lucky, if you're really lucky, it was talked about a little bit in premarital. And then you get married and you're just supposed you're supposed to know all the things now.
Yeah, it is scary, man. Also for us, like we're coming out of that generation where, and I don't want to throw him completely under the bus. He's just a figurehead for a lot of those conversations. The Josh Harris, I kissed dating goodbye.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And it's so much extreme purity culture where sex is demonized. No. God made sex. Like it was his idea. He created this thing. There's nothing wrong with sex. It's abusive sex, right? Like outside of marriage, not one man, not one woman for all of life. Like however you tend to use it. I had a friend who years ago used an illustration I think about every time I have this conversation, that fire is amazing and it's powerful and it has a purpose. But if you stand on your couch and you light matches and you throw them around your room, your life will burn down around you. Mm-hmm. Right? Like sex has a place inside the confines of marriage, just like fire has a place in a fire pit, in a fireplace, and it has value and joy can come from. Think of all the great conversations you've ever had sitting around a campfire. The same with sex, but there's so much that you're just left to like navigate the river of life on your own. Like nobody's ever been down that river before, could tell you where the rocks are. Why? I think because there's so much fear and shame from not talking about it.
Yeah. Okay.
There's so much like, if you're married, everybody's doing it. Why is it a taboo thing? Why wouldn't you say like, man, there are moments that like, it's incredible. And there are moments when it's really hard. One of the tough things for us, Nick, related to this was how taboo postpartum depression is.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So it wasn't until Rachel had our fit, that like somebody picked up on something that she said, a friend at church. And they were like, have you ever gone to a doctor to talk about postpartum depression? Mm-hmm. Finally, after Rachel went, she got on some medication. She came home. She was bawling one day, which was not uncommon. But this day, I said, what's wrong? Because she had gotten on medication. I was trying to figure out, is this not working? Do we need to figure something else out? And she said, I think I have been dealing with this through every pregnancy. And I had no clue what it was because no one ever talked to me about it.
Yeah.
And it's like now we have this antenna. Every time we have friends that have kids, we're just kind of leaning in and listening and looking for to be those guides a little further down the river to say, hey, postpartum depression is a for real thing. I have friends that I'm pretty sure are getting divorced right now. And I think it's almost exclusively postpartum depression oriented. Mm-hmm. And so trying to help them have those conversations, we have to talk, man. For one, with our kids, but also with each other. Like you and I have had so many great meals together because the ministry on the board for puts us in Louisville together every year for a couple of days. And we just go out to eat and we just talk about our life, our wives, our kids. And you just start to feel normal when you have someone else say, man, we've been there too. Well, C.S. Lewis said that's the definition of a friend when someone says you too. Yeah. Like all of us struggle with this. We have to get ahead, which is why I've said anything you ever need, I'm always a person in your team, man, in your corner. The sex talk has to happen because we got to start talking about. I don't want my kids to have to go Google things because God knows where those answers are going to come from. I want to be the source of those answers. I even want some of my friends. I want them to eventually be the source of some of those answers, right? That like I would have a godly counsel in the people that I place around my family, that they would feel as comfortable talking to you about these things because they know that I love and respect you and you are seen as a source of godly wisdom in their life. Before I pray they would ever go to Google or wherever to get an answer for a sexual question.
Dude, and you're right on this thread. That is my ultimate prayer with this is that why can't the church because we love the church. We love the bride. We are part of the bride. We serve in it. You work for it, right? Like I'm in the elder candidacy process at my church, right? Like, what if the church became the number one place to go to learn about sex and sexuality? Like, that would be transformative. And I think sometimes pastors would hear that and they're like, oh, one more thing we have to do. We're already doing so much. Our plate is full. And then I'm like, calm down, relax. Yeah. Just give this to every parent in your pew, because this is that communal byproduct of just saying, God made this. We can talk about it and it's safe here.
Yeah.
Dude, that's the dream.
I forget who it was that said it. They were talking about evangelism, and I think it was Spurgeon. They were critiquing Spurgeon's evangelistic sermons. He said, I hear you, and you might be right, but I like my way of doing it a lot better than your way of not doing it. And that's what I think about the sex talk, man, is like, I would rather you complain about whatever, Nick, you guys have created. For sure, give us feedback. Tell us if there's a thing that you would like to have said differently. But it's so much better to have a tool that you're using than not doing it at all. And I think that's the path most parents take, is you just avoid it. You just avoid it and you hope that they'll figure out that it'll go on, that life will go on. And life does go on. That's why people do this. Life does go on, but people get jammed up, make horrible decisions, find themselves in unbelievably difficult places because no one cared to have the conversation with them.
Mm-hmm. Dude,
I like our way of doing it a lot better than the way most people don't do it.
Yeah. And yeah, I cannot get off the vision of, same to your comment around, if all of your friends in your community, I'm like squeaky wheel yelling from the rooftops to all my buds. I have this one joke with my buddy. I was like, I'm going to give this to you for free. And then if you don't, because I can see how far a parent goes through it. Fun fact, I can see all the percentage of completion statistics. And I'm like, if you don't finish this in 1 year, I'm charging you for it.
Yeah, there's a bill that comes with it if you don't do it, and there's a bill that's coming both ways if you don't do it, man. So exactly.
Yeah. So Trey, last thing, if you're willing. Yeah. So I'm currently talking with, this is a literal number, thousands of pastors a week. I think I've currently emailed 10,000 pastors starting in January.
Oh,
and what would you say to a pastor listening? If I sent this to a pastor and said, hey, check out this podcast, I think it will encourage you. Yeah. You're a pastor. What would you want to hear, man? Like, I'm just, so I value you and your opinion as a friend. There's no wrong answer. It's okay. I'm just curious, your pastoral voice on this.
It's so funny because we're in this, we call it Saturated at 1122. It's 5 nights that we set aside each year to kind of lean in. And Jim Bergen was here on Wednesday night. We started. He's the pastor at Flatirons Church up in Colorado. And his whole thing was like, don't confuse sanctification and salvation. And he shared these stories of like very broken and hurting people who had gone to church and had been told, this is not for you. And they found their way to Flatirons, and he walked with them. And he made the comment in his sermon. He used the word hooker at one point in time. And dude, it was crazy how many people, I'd say like 6, 7 moms, probably homeschool moms, got upset that he said the word hooker. And then last night, Matt Chandler, and it's Matt Chandler, right? Like Pastor Joby joked, he's the Spurgeon of our generation. Matt Chandler made the comment how, and if you've heard Chandler, you've heard him say it 1,000 times, that the joy that we get in the things here, it was never meant to terminate here. It was always meant to roll up into the glory of God. So the taste of steak was never meant to end at just eating a piece of steak, but it was meant to roll up into God created that flavor. He created that experience. And so we should glorify him. And he said, sex, the feeling of an orgasm, should roll up into the glory of God. It should never terminate in that moment. There was a lady who got mad that he said the word orgasm last night. And I had this moment where I thought, you can't win as a pastor today.
Yeah.
Like, it's so hard to say some of these things in a pulpit because there are, man. Any given Sunday, you might have Nana who showed up with her 6-year-old granddaughter and she didn't take her to the kids ministry and she's sitting in, and you're going to try and engage your people on this topic. And listen, you can't preach the Bible and not deal with sex, because it's like every book, there's something. If Song of Solomon were taken out, we would still have enough on sex in every other book of the Bible to create a biblical ethic of sex. You have to talk about it. You have to deal with it. And I think one of the things that the Sex Talk has done for me is where I cannot go sometimes because of where the room is. I can point you as a partner and I can say, listen, moms and dads, you're in here right now. You know what I mean when I say you need to talk about this. You need to get ahead of this. I have referred more people to you. One of my best friends just called me. He's got twin boys that are 8. And he said, man, I got to have the conversation. I got to start, right? And I said, then you should go to TheSexTalk.com. You should go get this, man. Don't try and figure it out on your own. I'm also very well aware of, I don't know everything as a pastor. Again, I just said, I didn't have a bunch of classes on this. There was not a sex class, which is crazy to me. I met with a guy who was a president of seminary. He's no longer president of seminary. And I asked him, if you know, I think it was like 65% of men are looking at pornography.
It's higher now, but
that statistic, let's say it's 75. 75% of men are looking at pornography. Why is there not a class in seminary on this to either equip us to, like, how do you walk guys through this? Or let's be honest, Nick, that 75% doesn't change if you're taking classes at seminary. So 75% of the people who are sitting in my room, my classroom with me, they are actively looking at pornography. Why is there not a class on that? If COVID should be a great example for us. If you have a bunch of people who get infected with something, we have to figure out how to deal with it. Why is the church not figuring out how to deal with a lot of this stuff? Talk about it. Get it out there. You guys have been an incredible partner to me to help people have those conversations. But you've also set me up to follow up and clean up as a pastor. Like, how can we come around you as a church now? How can I get your wife? You're beginning to have these conversations. How can I get you around some other parents to help each other navigate these moments? Like, Rachel's right now. She left right before we started the Zoom call. She's in a disciple group with a bunch of girls. And all of our kids are around the same ages. And she's using the conversations we've had from the Sex Talk to help them navigate. And she's pointing them to those things. Like, you have to get in a herd. You have to have people around you navigating these things with you. And I think so much of pastoral ministry is trying to help people know what they need to know, but take the next step of faith, just one step at a time. And that's how I think you guys have really helped me. You've been a partner to help me say the things that I can't necessarily say in every room at all times. You've been a place that I can point people to carry the conversation. And it is a step of faith to create an account on the SexTalk.com, just like it is a step of faith to continue through that process and not give up just because life happens. I'm a great example. It might take you 9 months to do it. A lot of good things come out of 9 months. So, and you guys have been a great, like, how can I now help you that you are engaged in this to help other people? I mean, that's what we're all about. How can we help people take steps of faith? And how can we get people in community to take steps of faith? If you're a pastor, I don't know why you're not currently using SexTalk.com. What else? My question to you would be, if you're not using it, what are you using? And it goes right back to that Spurgeon quote. I like our way of doing it better than your way of not doing it.
I'm going to clip that, by the way. The ministry vision of Proven Ministries, which built TheSexTalk.com, is to see a revival of sexual integrity throughout the entire bride of Christ. Everything you just narrated is my prayer around the Sex Talk, where what if we were so chosen by the Lord to be the safe solution to allow the church to lean into this conversation? Because to your point, 75% of seminarians are addicted, but 75% of men in the church are, and women are now struggling too. And we have this epidemic problem. Our ministry does work in those spaces, but that is hard work. You can't talk about sex in church. Talk about trying to talk about pornography or lust or like it is so much of a bigger issue. And so in a really cool sort of way, I try and put myself in a pastor's shoes. I'm like, bro, You don't have to do anything other than throw up a banner outside of your kids' area and email your parents, and you have just taken a massive leap into beginning to establish your church as this bulwark of biblical sex and sexuality. And it's in the homes. It's not another thing on the pastor's to-do list. It's not another slide you have to figure out how to program or announcement you have to figure out how to make. I'm like, they're like, hey, how do we start this? I'm like, literally just email your people, and here, I'm going to send you a banner. Just put it outside of the kids area. It's funny because every Sunday I see parents sign up at all these different churches around the country. And I'm like, because I know how long the church has been online. And I'm like, these parents are like, oh, we got to do that. Oh, we've been meaning to do that. Oh, we got to do that. And they pull out their phone when they're dropping their kid off at the youth area, and they scan the QR code and they sign up. It's just hilarious to me. And I equally want to come alongside of what you just said and say, if you're a pastor and you're listening to this, like, we are literally doing all the heavy lifting.
Yeah.
And we're not saying you have to say anything crazy from the pulpit. And what it does is it allows you to begin shepherding your people in this space. Because guess what? What you didn't mention in the sex talk is the second video of the sex talk is, how are you doing with your sexuality? Because that directly impacts how you can have the sex talk with your children. So guess what? Dad's addicted, guaranteed. We'll help him because that's what our ministry does. And if you have a 14-year-old daughter and you haven't had the sex talk with her yet, unfortunately, she's probably looking at it. And we have a curriculum that can help her with that. And I'm not trying to be like doom and gloomy, but with the sex talk, it's so safe because it's, hey, church, hey, community, we want you to protect your children from the darkest things of the enemy because he is trying to get them. Here's how we're doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, man. It's, I would say you are so unaware of how the enemy is probably already winning in the minds of your children. You ever watch like children's cartoons?
No, I don't even let my children watch cartoons for that reason.
Saying to me, I'm a pretty, if I'm in the room and the TV's on, I am listening to, like if my kids would just watch Dude Perfect nonstop, it would be, but they'll put on, and it's the like most innocent level of things where you're like, I remember when Onward came out, the Disney movie a few years ago, and there's the transgender couple in that movie. And it's a throwaway clip, right? Like it's not that big of a deal. Or Lightyear, where there's like a transgender couple. And it's so much. We talk about Romans all the time, that we're not supposed to be conformed to this world. And then we bring the world to our kids and we're like, here, just let it parent you. I heard a pastor a few weeks ago say, when you give your kids a cell phone, you're not giving them access to the world. You're giving the world access to your kids. And I haven't stopped thinking about that. We're in the throes of that conversation where I keep telling my kids, you're not getting a cell phone. I will not give the world access to you. And they're just inundated. And listen, the scripture could not be more clear on this. Like, the thief does not come to entertain. The thief does not come to like help you have another way that you could approach life. He comes to steal, to kill, to destroy, just to like ravage and scorched earth the mind, heart, and life of your child. Why wouldn't you have a game plan against that? If I told you, like, you remember 9/11, it was just, the anniversary was just yesterday. If I told you that the Taliban was coming to your town and that they were going to attack the school that your kids were in, would you not have some type of plan on, like, at least don't send them to school that day or whatever the thing is? All of us overreacted for right reasons after 9/11. Why don't we do the same thing with the reality of the enemy? And again, that is not go and hide somewhere like The Village. It is, how do you live in the world but not of the world? How do you be sober-minded, like Peter says in 1 Peter, that there's a roaring lion and he's seeking someone to devour. And those aren't necessarily grown adults. That's also kids he's seeking to devour. How do you get ahead of that? Be vigilant in your parenting. Have partners like TheSexTalk.com. Have community that you're in. Be a part of a local church. Model for your kids what it looks like to be a faithful, godly man, woman, whatever that thing is. I think so many of us, man, to like, was it Keith Green? So many of us were asleep in the light. We're just asleep at the...
And may parents hear this, may pastors hear this and decide to wake up in that light. May they say that yesterday is done and I have today, and we will do something about this. And that's why we're doing this podcast. That's why I'm so honored that you are with us, Trey, and you went through it and you share your perspective and your feedback. So, bro, we could literally do long form 3 hours and I would not even feel tired. But I want to say thank you for sharing from your heart, man, because it is invaluable, and people will listen, pastors will listen, and parents will listen. And man, they can be encouraged. They don't need to be shamed. They can be encouraged.
Yeah. Yeah, there's life and hope and joy ahead of us. There's more grace ahead of us than we could ever imagine. There's mercy that's new every morning. Don't give up, mom and dad. Lean in. Lean in.
And on that note, this has been another episode of the Sex Talk podcast. Tune in again next time. Thanks, guys. Like and subscribe.
Welcome to TheSexTalk.com, where parents can go to get clear and confident to have the sex talk with their kids.
Because I think sometimes we think we're the first generation of Christians who's had to live in a sexually depraved society, and we're not.
We are so glad that there is material like this for our world.
We ourselves are often nervous about having the conversations with our kids.
The Sex Talk is about so much more than the birds and the bees, or explaining to your kids where babies come from.
In that, we need to come alongside them and serve as a coach.
We only have a window of time to invest in our children.
What do you wish you would have had when you were 12?
We're going to take a journey that might be a bit uncomfortable, but if we will pass through the truth shall make us free.
It is such an important conversation for you to have with your children, and we are just so thankful that it's now available.
What these conversations are, I think, is something that our culture and society need to be having holistically.
Because we do believe that it is life-changing for you, your marriage, for your family, and for your child. We are so honored to be your guides throughout each session of this course. So let's jump in.